Hi, I'm Charles Galda, President of Vision New England, and your host for the Church in Action program, where we talk with New England leaders about the imperative to make disciples, do justice, foster unity, and share Jesus to transform lives in New England. This week, I'm talking with Bob Niedermeier. Bob's a marketplace leader. He serves as the CEO of 5 family packaging businesses with more than 160 employees. But he's also the founder and executive director of Urban Impact. So a very diverse portfolio is the way we would have talked about it when I was in the corporate world. Bob, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Bob,
Appreciate it.
before we dig into, I want to hear about the vocational ministry work you do, but tell us a little bit about your family businesses.
So my parents immigrated here from Germany and studied in the packaging world in Germany. And when they came here, started the first company, Valley Container, in 1969. And it's basically boxes. We make corrugated boxes and packaging and displays. And over the next 5 decades, kind of started different operations, all paper based. And so we're just still a manufacturing company in Connecticut, if you could believe it. And serve the tri-state New England and actually all across the country. And it's just kind of what I've been groomed for as a second generation. We actually have a third generation coming in.
And so for folks who want to buy American packaging, what are some names they should look for, Bob? Just out of curiosity, I guess I'm doing a commercial now.
Yeah, well, I mean it's very it's interesting because there's a lot of independent box makers like us out there, and so most of the packaging that you deal with anywhere in the United States is probably from the United States because it doesn't ship well. Some people were buying from overseas years ago, but that's all changed specifically now with shipping. So most boxes are made continentally, and Valley Containers, one of them that serves New England.
Interesting. Thanks. Well, let's shift gears a little bit. So Vision New England, as you know, completed this research project with over 100 leaders from around New England to document what God was exposing in the church over the last couple of years. And there's consensus that God wants to change things in his church going forward. We're calling it the Post-Pandemic Church Project. And there's tons more to the research, but to boil it down for listeners, the post-pandemic church needs to make disciples who are biblically literate, who are becoming more like Jesus, sacrificing or disadvantaging themselves to love and serve others, doing justice and fixing those things in their communities that are broken, meaning things that violate the pre-fall order, and in unity across the divides like race, gender, ethnicity, because when we do that, people want to know Jesus. And so that's really where our focus is. Now, Bob, how do you think about this nexus between being a disciple and doing justice with that broad definition of justice?
It's interesting when you listen to the word justice because it's one that certainly is applicable to our Christian walk with Jesus, but it's one that you see so much in the news and in the cycles in a lot of different ways. And so, from a justice perspective, we look at it as kind of the widows and the orphans. Those are the ones who God talks about. Jesus says, "Go care for them." And there is a lot of injustices out there in the world that we live here on earth that are particularly focused towards those different people and who are orphans or widows. And I use that term a little loosely in that a lot of the orphans that I would consider orphans are ones who they have moms, they have dads, but they may not necessarily be engaged. They may not be present. So they are sort of orphaned in this world. And so that's where we kind of jump in and really kind of use the discipling charge that Jesus gives us and says, let's focus there. Let's focus on where those injustices are happening to really just spread the love of Christ with whatever's needed, whenever it's needed. And that's kind of the loose way we attack it.
And so now your ministry is about education. How does education fit into that justice topic then?
Interestingly enough, our ministry started without education. So when we started the whole idea of going out and serving, it was to spread the gospel. And it was to, kind of, I'll say youth groupie it, where we would have kids come together and we'd talk about Jesus and we'd have some lessons and we'd share some meals and things like that. And during that initial time when we were starting up in 2008, 2009, I spent a lot of time in the local school that was next to the community in which we serve. And the principal in there really opened my eyes to the needs for education, and really, said, the kids, they can't read, they can't write, they're coming unprepared, was really kind of a mantra that is stuck for all these 14 years now. And, the education side was kind of morphed in as we said, okay, we're teaching kids about Jesus, we're mentoring to them outside of school time. And when the education became a focus, that there was this inequity, this injustice that was happening from an education standpoint, that's when we started really focusing in on doing whatever it was that was needed. And in this case, we started out having some volunteers come into the school and start working with the teachers to kind of be paras and to just have some more resources there, because Bridgeport is just an under-resourced community as far as education goes.
So I want to talk a little bit more about Bridgeport and urban impact, but let me just pick at that a little bit. So what I heard you just say is that somebody not getting a quality education is a justice issue.
I would push a little back on that and say, okay, it's not necessarily them not getting a quality education, because Bridgeport has the ability to provide quality education for students in Bridgeport.
Okay.
Some of the students, not all of them, but a proportionately higher amount in Bridgeport of the students are unprepared to utilize the systems that are in place in Bridgeport. So they're at a disadvantage, because I like to say many haven't learned how to learn by the time they get to school, just because of different elements that are happening in their development growing up, whether parents are working it's a single mom who's working 3 jobs and isn't able to be there for their child, and there's no father in the house. And so there's a missing component there. So sometimes there can be some demonization as far as, the parents aren't there and all. Well, the parents are doing the best they can, and it's not their fault. It's just the circumstances. And that's where the injustice, I think, comes in, because it's not a purposeful thing,
And so I've seen data about poorer families tend to have less books in the house. So I think about, with us raising our kids, we had books in the house, we read to our kids and stuff like that. But if we were a single parent household with 3 jobs, I'm guessing reading at bedtime, right, and having those books around is less likely. And that's part of the being unprepared when I come to the school system. Is that the kind of thing you mean?
I think so. And I think it may, and we do bring a lot of, we try to have book handouts. If we're having some kind of event or something, we have some books available, take them home, get the books in the house. We know those stats as well. But it really comes back to having a priority for that bedtime reading, having a priority for the parents to be engaged in the students, learning. And where's the parents' education level? There's some of that. One of the terms I heard early on was about babies having babies. And I said, what's that mean, babies having babies? And it was, if the children are growing up and not prepared, and then they're having children, they've never gotten to the point to understand, that reading at bedtime, and can they read themselves? And there's a lot of those types of situations happening as well.
And now some of us may say, well, that's not my fault, right? I didn't do that, and those parents shouldn't do that, but that doesn't change the kid's situation.
Exactly right.
Right.
Exactly right.
And we as Christians, to your point about the orphans, we as Christians are called to do something about it.
Correct.
And so tell us, set the stage a little bit about Bridgeport, if you would. Then I'd like to hear what Urban Impact is doing about it.
So, I would say I'm not an expert on Bridgeport, even though I've been working here all my whole life, and I've been working
a broad brush, right? You and I know Bridgeport because we're from Connecticut, but for other people,
gotcha. It's the biggest city in Connecticut. There's a number of community apartment complexes that are kind of focus a lot of those who are struggling economically, socially, and they kind of cluster in different areas, and there's a lot of gangs that are within them that kind of compete against each other. And so they're spread out in different parts of the community. At one time, I remember back in the 80s, there was so much violence around here. It was like our building here was like Fort Knox, because there was a shooting a week and like a murder a month or something like that. And that's kind of had some ebbs and flows over the years. It's certainly not where it was in the 80s, but there is a fair amount of crime. And I'm just going to say that there's been a fair amount of corruption, within the city as well. There's some history there. So it's a very dynamic landscape to operate in. And so some get caught up in that and kind of, are in the political arena and kind of trying to figure that all out. We just, we keep our head down and we just, we want to do. That's our thing. We want to, while the grander scheme is trying to be figured out, we want to be effective. And that's kind of our approach to it.
So not just higher crime rates, higher poverty rates, right? All the things we would think
food
of.
insecurities, homelessness, it's got everything in there.
Everything we would attribute to urban environment.
Inner city urban living. Yeah.
And so now, what is urban impact then? And how have you guys stepped into Bridgeport?
So, I always say I'm a late bloomer. I came to faith in 2006 in my 30s. And I was just a guy who was making boxes and coming up and running companies. And in 2006, after I came to the Lord, I came to our church, and they went on missions trips, and we were going down to New Orleans. And so in New Orleans, after Hurricane Katrina, they were doing relief there. And while we were down there, the pastor who was running the teams coming in, he kept saying, thanks for coming down, but don't make this just something you do once a week, or, once in your thing. It should be what you do all the time, getting out and serving. And while we were walking the streets of New Orleans, we were looking around going, boy, this really looks a lot like Bridgeport, And so right around Bridgeport, going back to that question, there's a lot of opulence. There's a lot of wealth in Southern Connecticut. And yet in the middle of it is a lot of poverty in Bridgeport and some surrounding cities. And so we're like, I think God's telling us to do something like this. And so we came back, 3 of us, started Urban Impact, and we just started praying. I was a business guy, so I'm like, hey, I can manage things. I don't know what this serving thing's about. I'm just new to my faith. And so we decided to plant ourselves in this one community down on the west end of Bridgeport, P.T. Barnum Apartments. It's one of the low-income communities. And so our mission was to do everything deep there, not Bridgeport wide, but community wide in that one community. Because again, something we learned from the pastor in New Orleans, you want to be effective where you are and not thin. You want to have depth and relationship. And so everything that we do was going to be based on the relationship and is based on relationship. And so our first act was to come in and do what we were doing in New Orleans, which was, let's help rebuild these homes, which can't be in that good of, we had our own biases and all that. And it was very funny how God's hand really guided us and said, nope, not here, not there. And we found out it's public housing. There's unions involved. You can't go in. You can't just do stuff. And so the best move we did was connect with the local resident president of the association for the community. And we sat with her and said, what do you need? Like what would you like to see happen? And that's where she said, our kids don't have male role models. They're out on the streets. They need something to do. They need mentors. And can you do that? And so that was kind of the beginning of our, youth group type approach, to have different sessions after school where we had, we fed them, we played games with them, and then we had Bible lessons and teachings. And that was the beginning of our Urban Impact, kind of thing back in 2008.
Yeah. But I love that, asking the people there what's needed, because sometimes we do go in with our preconceived notion of, I want to do X. I hear that from ministries all the time, where people call up not saying, how can I help you do your thing, but I want to do X.
And I still hear it. I still hear it. And but it's fun.
Yeah.
That's our opportunity to educate
Yeah.
and to become, more spirit-led than self-led, right?
Yeah.
That's the idea of it.
Yeah. And so you started out and you said it was kind of youth groupy
Mhm.
early on. How has that evolved over time?
So we've grown, we've honed, and so we started with maybe 15 volunteers and 15 kids, and as soon as we started being intentional about it, right out of the gate, we swelled to over 100 kids, maybe 125 kids on Monday or Tuesday nights, and we broke it up into two different groups. So we had third, fourth, and fifth graders, and then sixth, seventh, and eighth graders. So we had prime time, and then prime time junior,
Hmm.
and then a number of years later that evolved for the high school. So we call that Revolution. So now we have three groups that we have kind of a youth group type program.
Hmm.
And that's the ministry side, we call it. And there's all kinds of mentoring that happens outside of the programs. One of the things that's a hallmark of what we ask for and we do is that when we have volunteers, we ask them to commit for a semester, like either September to December or January to May, because there's so much transition in the lives of a lot of the students and the families. We don't want that. We want relationships. We want volunteers to show up with the heart of Jesus, to serve as they're being called, and to share the love that they have for Jesus with others. And the thing is, it doesn't matter if you're black or white or rich or poor, love translates all that, and love pierces through a lot of the barriers that kind of society throws out there. And kids are smart. They can spot authenticity and fakeness very easily. So by having that longer serving time, some people say, I want to do something one night with my kids, or just one night. I'm like, well, this isn't really for you then. What we want is for you to be there, committed over time. And we see like 90% of the people who volunteer, plus maybe even more, you don't have to ask them to come back. Like, you coming back? Like, of course I'm coming back, because that relationship is what God calls us to be in. And it's almost intoxicating, because it's beautiful when it's based on the love of Jesus.
And so today you're doing these Tuesday night events from the third grade to high school, through high school.
That's right.
And so walk me through, if I start out, let's assume I'm a third grader and I stay with the program the whole time. What am I going to do, experience, have happened through that whole time?
Yep. So we have the faith-based side ministry, and then we have the education-based. So the education is in the school, because there's a local school right next to the community.
Hmm.
And then there's some after-school program that we run for 3 days a week, which is homework and very much literacy, kind of building up, getting that better than it is. And so a student could start within our urban impact kind of pipeline as early as kindergarten. And so we focus in school tutoring on the lowest grades, K through 3, because what the principal was saying, the kids are coming unprepared. So the youngest kids are the most pliable. They're easiest to kind of bring them back up to speed quicker, before our foundations get, our habits get formed as we get older. And so a kindergartner could start in there, can start seeing volunteers in their classroom, getting those relationships there through the school system. And then we start taking second graders, I believe it's second graders, into the after school program. And so second grade, they might be in school tutoring and coming 3 nights a week for the after school program. So we really try to get them well and educationally kind of move that needle early. And then in third grade, we would be encouraging them, as they're in our other programs, say, hey, why don't you come over to the youth group side of things as well, because there's fun there. You don't have to do schoolwork, and it's good. And we feed the kids at all of our programs. And so at that time, we're also talking with the parents. So we always want to engage the parents as well, because they have more influence than we'll ever have. So, we could start assessing, what do the parents need? Are there educational challenges that they have, or maybe they don't even know about the resources a lot of times that are available to them for their kids. And so we really start a partnership at the early ages. And by the time they work through all of those different grades, my wife and I, we were running the high school program until recently, and we actually have them over at our house every week. And it's wonderful to see now 12th graders, high schoolers, even ones who've already graduate, come back, and they come to our house on Tuesday nights. And it's wonderful when they have that relationship. It's not a program anymore. It's Uncle Bob and Auntie Vic, that's what they call us. And they it's just family, and that's the whole idea. If you're in our program all the way through, by the time you start getting to 7th, 8th grade, you're going to camps and things like that. It's just a natural relational thing that kids are part of.
So I heard tutoring in there, which is going to make some of us a little nervous, because I remember trying to teach our kids the math stuff and help them with math, and I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Right?
Right? Yeah, right. And so are we talking about that, or is the tutoring something different? And how do you equip people for it?
So the tutoring is, I always used to say, if you can read and write, you can tutor, and you have a heart for Jesus. So you just have a heart to serve. So there is kind of a break between the ministry and education is pretty clear. Obviously, if you're involved in the youth group side of things, we want you to be a believer if you're doing any teaching, obviously. But we have some people who are kind of on their own journey. From the education side, it's more secular, it's more civic, right? And so we have a lot of people who aren't believers who are going into the school during the day. We call them tutors, but what they're basically doing is helping the teachers with the class, and they're helping the teacher with a student who may be struggling. And so if they're teaching the student, I haven't heard yet of the tutors actually being lost, because if the kids can take direction, the tutors can take direction.
Gotcha.
And so it works out well with that pairing. As far as the after school portion, we have our own we use our own homeschool type stuff, where if we're trying to remediate some reading, we'll just start with wherever we'll assess the child where they are, and just start, homeschool tracks there. So it's really easy to jump right in, and it's just, anybody can do it. You just need a willing heart and some patience and some time.
So I'm hearing classroom participation, supporting the teacher, the student. I'm hearing after class or after school, mentoring, tutoring.
Yeah.
I'm hearing youth group type focus from 3rd grade up. I'm hearing outings and other stuff that we might associate with youth groups, but are separate from Tuesday night.
Yep, we have we take kids out. Like, I'll have kids over to the house, and we'll build a chicken coop or something together, and I'll teach them how to do power tools and things like that. And all of those, we take them to colleges, we take them for fun outings to local sports things. To local arenas, we'll get some tickets to monster jams, and we send them to youth camp up in the summer for a week at a time, and summer VBSs and enrichment programs over the summer, and anything to just expand the child's experience in life.
And so I'm sure some people are listening to saying, wait a minute, you just said a Christian organization is going into schools. Schools don't like Christians. Government doesn't like Christians, and there's some validity to that at times. But is that your experience?
Not at all. Not at all. And it's maybe that's God's blessing, and we always look back and say, how is this still going after 14 years? And it's by God's hand, And so we find that when we're in the school doing our youth programs after school with youth group, we're paying for the school. So we're renting the school so we can do whatever we want. And that's never been challenged. It's never been an issue. It might be a legal law that they have to, I don't know, but that works out. When we're in the school, that's why I use the civic side. We certainly tell our tutors, okay, you can't bring the Bible in there and start, doing literacy with the Bible. That would be a little too egregious. So, you're there for education. You go with the servant's heart. You go with the education in mind, and it works out very well. And the school is, loves the help. They need resources. you can't get enough, I would say. And because we partner with them and we listen to what their needs are, we want to be that resource for them. So they welcome us with open arms. And a lot of the educators are Christians themselves. So they're like, yeah, all right, that's good. And so we've never really run into any of that hostility or anything like that because of our faith.
Yeah, I've kind of seen a theme across New England where when we're working with government to help them do their thing, they're very receptive to the help. DCF loves us. The FBI and law enforcement loves us on human trafficking. Schools love us when we're helping with educating children. So there's something there about when we serve, right?
Yeah.
That suddenly those barriers break down and it opens doors. So talk to me about, I'd like to hear two more things as we kind of wrap up in the next couple of minutes. Two things that I think are important is, so what are the educational outcomes of what you do? And how does it work evangelistically? Do you find children coming to faith, growing in faith? So both pieces of that, please.
So I'll tell you a great story for that second question. So educationally, when we first started out, our thing is to just do. Like, I'm also a manufacturer, so I'm all about efficiency and measurables and metrics and all that stuff. But when we walk with the Lord, faith is not depending on the seen, right? It's the unseen, it's the unknown. And so how do we measure if we know we're following God and we know we're going in there and something's happening? How do we measure that? And for our first few years, when we were in the school with our tutors in the class, we didn't have the measurements, we didn't have the metrics. And I remember a couple of years in a row, there was a numeracy coach there who said, let's have a little gathering at the end of the year and a thank you for all the tutors. And we did that. And she brought up a PowerPoint, and the PowerPoint showed the students who were working with our tutors and then the school itself with regard to proficiency, growth, and things like that. And it was like this, the school was here, our kids were here. And so we're like, oh, can I have that chart? Because that's a good chart. I don't know how you measured it, but I like it. I like the outcome. And we knew
your kids were by far outperforming the kids.
Outpacing the school. And so we took that over the years and kind of got some other, and that, year over year, every time we get different data points that they change all the time, we would always see that trend where our kids were always outperforming the school. So we know we're having impact there. And on our after school, we actually have a new one now where we're measuring their proficiency now, assessing them. A sixth grader can read at a first grade. Okay, great. Not great, but they're at a first grade. Let's get them up to second. Let's get them up to third. And so we measure that and have different ways of tracking that. As far as the faith goes, we absolutely have had a number of, students who've, gone to the camps and have, received Christ. We've had one who was baptized a few years ago at our church. And, it's a longer journey because one of the things that you have to attract the kids, right? And you attract the kids with fun. I say we're not above bribing. You want some food? Come on. I'll take you out to Wendy's, and now I got them in the car, and we can talk about whatever I want to talk about. So the reception of the message is, it's in God's time and it's in the individual's priority. So when you're dealing with young kids, I have my own, we have a whole different podcast on, when do people really can youth really accept Christ? But I gauge it by the thirst. The thirst of the questions that come afterwards shows that the Spirit is working within the child. And the best example of that is we've had this one family that grew up with us. He was a little nugget, and now he's grown and going to graduate next year. His sisters are out of the system as far as the school goes. And they came back. The older sister, she's 21, 22. And she came in to my house when we had the high school stuff. And she came right to me. And her name was Rosalba. And she's looking at me. She goes, I have questions for you. And I'm like, I haven't seen you in a year. Great, awesome. And we're, hugging and talking. She goes, all right. And she just unloaded on me with all of these spiritual questions that she was wrestling with. That it brought tears to my eyes.
Yeah.
Because God was still working. And
Yeah.
even though the foundation that we laid all those years,
Yeah.
it could be dry in the desert, but to see that glimpse of the Spirit working, and the glimpse in her eye of hunger to know more about who this God is that we've been talking about, it it never goes out void. That's what we always say. So it's great.
That's a great reminder, because we're such an immediate gratification society, even in the church. I shared Jesus, you didn't accept Jesus. Oh, well, I guess that didn't work. When we all know intellectually, it's a journey for people to
It is.
get there. And every touch point with another believer is just a step along the way to God's timing. And so that's a
Amen.
great story. Thanks for sharing it.
Yeah,
Bob,
no
thanks
problem.
for serving in the marketplace, and thank you for serving at Urban Impact. And
No
just
problem.
what a great ministry. I loved hearing more about it. Thanks again for being with us too.
No problem. I
I'd also
appreciate the time.
Thanks. I'd like to thank Jess Mangano, our producer, and our listeners. We hope this discussion helps us be the people of God who do the work of God, doing justice, making disciples, fostering unity, sharing Jesus to transform lives and our world. Visit us at Vision New England for past episodes and resources, and click donate to partner with us to accelerate evangelism in New England. This program is brought to you by our friends at the Luis Palau Association, who are dedicated to proclaiming the good news, uniting the church, and impacting cities worldwide.